All right.
I've learned more about my relationship with God, even with Edo, than any other way, probably.
Yeah.
You have to consider how he feels about some of the things that we're involved in.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier about growing, and Renee and I are still trying to figure out how to be parents to adult children, and we hadn't quite figured it out yet. If you know, let us know, because we're struggling. I'm longing for that size. All right, so first off, the discussion questions. How do the laws in these chapters, the ones we've been reading, show God's concern for justice, worship, and community life? So the things I came up with is he's looking for a centralization in worship. The laws instruct the Israelites to demolish all the places of pagan worship and bring their sacrifices to the place the Lord will choose, which he hasn't identified at this point. This maintains the distinctness of their worship and prevents the Canaanite practices from creeping in. Interestingly enough, God tells us that that's going to happen, or that he wants us to destroy all those things because he's afraid of the Canaanites' practices creeping in. We learn later that's exactly what happens. Social justice. The laws address various aspects of life, including morality, community, conduct, worship practice, and social justice. These laws stress the need for a cohesive society that respects God's, honors families, and cares for the vulnerability such as orphans, widows, and foreigners. And then leadership. The laws outline the expectations and responsibilities for the Israelites as God's chosen people. Moses instructs the king to be chosen by God. So even in this early stage, before this is, I think, the first mention of a king that kind of comes along. Be chosen by God and to write himself a copy of the law and read it in all the days of his life, ensuring obedience to the law. We also know that doesn't happen. These laws are not merely rules, but they're supposed to be given and governed for the well-being of the people and rooted in the character of God, who is both just and loving. So the three sub-parts of that I kind of came up with was centralization of worship, social justice, and leadership. Not only how God's people are supposed to be leaders of the world, right, and represent him, but also how the leaders of God's people are supposed to act themselves. So leadership in both internally and externally. Thoughts on that? Go ahead.
About these laws are made for them, but because of them obeying those laws, the other outside people watch it and they know what God's law is by watching it. So not only in their society, but the rest of the society is affected.
Yeah, and there are parts of God's law that directly address foreigners living with them too, and how they are to act toward them, and what applies to them. So yes, it sets that example, that leadership to the rest of the world, and how you're supposed to function as a society. Agreed. Anything else?
Say your question again.
How do the laws in these chapters show God's concern for justice, worship, and community life? And I said there's 3 subcategories to that I came up with. There could be more. Centralization of worship, social justice, and leadership.
I think it's fascinating. There's so much of this that is almost exactly reflective of the Texas Penal Code. The laws that we have today, not the penalties. You don't get stoned for being obedient. You're not supposed to get stoned at all. That's illegal. The things that God detests are many of the things that are illegal. And until the last 50 years, adultery was a crime. Homosexuality was a crime. All these things our whole system of justice derives from what's in Deuteronomy. It's very, very, you'll find the morality. You said you can't legislate morality, well, we do it every day. And that's where it comes from. You look at these things that God detests, and you can find them in the Texas Penal Code.
Yeah, so our modern day legal system draws its roots directly from these chapters. We have backed off on the punishment phase a tad, I would think. But the basics of what is right and what is wrong to a large degree in our modern laws come right out of here. It does seem like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like every generation gets a little bit further away from what God's word and a little bit more liberal. Is that accurate? Okay.
As I've read Deuteronomy this week, the week before we were here, but it's just, one, over and over Moses tells it. If you obey my laws and follow me with your heart, you will have blessings. If you choose to not follow me, you turn your back on me, you're gonna be cursed.
Mhm.
And the land will be cursed. Everything will be cursed. You will be sent away. And this was hundreds of years before they went to captivity. He knew, God knew this is what would happen. And yet, he still says in Deuteronomy, when you return your heart to me, I will have mercy on you and forgive you and restore you. That is, says something to us today, that even if we turn away, but then we turn back to God, he will restore us, he will have mercy, and he will forgive us.
Now, God is very aware, and it's obvious as he's talking to Moses there at the end that we as human beings struggle to follow his laws, to follow his word, and also that we are easily tempted by Satan and his forces in the world to be turned away. Yes, sir, you had something.
I believe that in our hearts, even though we don't follow them, I feel wrong when I'm wrong. And when I feel wrong, it pretty much lines up with what he said I shouldn't be doing. I don't really need anybody else to say, well, a lot of that. No.
Yeah, I agree. For those people, what he's saying is that when he's done wrong, he feels it in his heart. He knows it, right? So he doesn't need someone to tell him because it's already there. And I think God gives us that conscience, subconscious, whatever you want to call it, knowledge that when you're doing something that is questionable, you kind of got it. You kind of know it. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it right. I mean, and then learning is repetition. So he tells us because I know I'm wrong, but it's kind of like I'm your favorite. I'm your brother. So I get a pass right there.
One of the repetition is what made me think of this. One of the sayings in my family that goes way back, we're Irish, is that my grandfather told my mom this. He said, that brick wall will not move no matter how many times you smash your head against it. And her response was, it'll move for me. That skipped my generation and went straight to my children. I don't know how that happened, but it. All right. Any other comments, thoughts on that? One more.
One more. This, God sets out in the Old Testament, says, you do good, I'll treat you good. But in our lives, we talk a lot about when bad things happen to good people. What's going, where did the Jews get the idea that if you behave and obey God, God will bless you? And if you're in the gutter and crippled and lame, who sinned, him or his father? It's an interesting dichotomy to try to put together.
It is, and definitely in the Old Testament, the Jews believe that if something bad happened, if you're living in the gutter or you have some kind of deformity, then there's some sin involved. Don't think that applies to the New Testament, and I really don't think it applies to our current society. But it definitely applied to this time period that we're talking about. No doubt about that.
Yeah, I love the fact that, God's obviously seeing everything happening, right? I think you briefly mentioned this. He said, when you enter the land, you might think to yourself, we need a king. So if you do that, here are some things to consider, right? And you read the list of things that God outlines for them. like he shouldn't take multiple wives. What happened to Solomon, right? It says here, if he takes multiple wives, they might lead his heart astray. And later on in Solomon's life, that's exactly what happened, right? Is his heart was led astray. And the other thing that I thought about too was there's a part in here where he talks about like sexual purity. And he talks about, let's see, if a man is discovered committing adultery, this is Deuteronomy 22:22. If a man is discovered committing adultery, both he and the woman must die. In this way, you'll purge Israel of such evil. But then in my mind, I picture later on when they bring the woman caught in adultery before Jesus. Right? Here's the law. It says, if a man and a woman are caught, they must be stoned. And we always act like, where's the man why wasn't he brought before Jesus as well? Because that's what the law said. So it's almost like the changing, the shifting of the guidelines that God gave, right? Here's this, well, obviously if she was caught in adultery, she had to be caught with someone, but yet that person wasn't brought before Jesus. The man wasn't brought before Jesus. And so, this is the law that God has given his people. And yet we see as time progresses, either some of it coming true because he's like, if you do this, this is going to happen. And it does. Or Israel themselves starts to shift how they view it. Like, no, maybe we'll just bring the woman before Jesus to see what he does with her instead of, the guilty parties.
And to go back to Solomon real quick, when I was reading that section about kings, I thought of Solomon. It talked not only about multiple wives, it talked about a lot of money.
And horses.
And Solomon was the richest, really, really, really wealthy, right? So I read through that and thought that sounds a lot like a warning against Solomon to me. Let's move on or we're going to run out of time. So we briefly mentioned earlier the curses and the blessings. What do the blessing and curses teach about the seriousness of the covenant? The blessings are a direct result of obedience to God's commandments, while the curses are a clear indication of the consequences of disobedience. Blessings are not arbitrary, but are the result of a life lived in harmony with his will, while the curses are a deterrent to disobedience and a reminder of the severe consequences of turning away from God's commandment. So God gives us both blessings and curses. If you do what you're supposed to do, you get the blessings. If you don't, then there are consequences for your actions. I feel like our modern day society struggles with not wanting to accept consequences for their actions ever. We always want the blessings, and this may be true for mankind, for the history of mankind. I'm just talking about us. That we all want those blessings, right? But nobody wants to deal with the consequences of your actions. We'll take consequences when they're good consequences. So my mom used to tell me as a little kid, the one thing that would really drive her up the wall is if I asked the same question multiple times, right? Can I go outside and play? No. Can I go outside and play? No. And her point was, if I asked to go outside and play and she said yes, I wasn't going to ask again. So accept the answer the first time, whatever that answer is. That's really hard to do, right? You can get the answer you wanted from mom. You go ask dad. One of the worst whippings I ever got in my life. I was probably first grade again, and mom got a brand new car, little Toyota Corolla, nothing in the early 70s, little economy car. But I want to ride home in that thing. And so I asked dad, and he said no. Mom was already sitting out the car with the engine running, so I ran out there and asked her. She said, sure, come in. And away we went. No cell phones. Dad's looking for me around that dealership, can't find me. No way to call her and find out where I am. When he got home, whew, that was ugly. So consequences and blessings. What do y'all think? What in your life, what does that look like?
Well, first you need to, just as he said in the latter chapters, make a choice between life or death. These are your choices. We all have choices, and we have consequences from those choices.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's we choose to eat unhealthy things, and then we suffer the consequences in our body. Some people choose to do drugs, and they suffer consequences not only in their body, but in their families, and spreads.
Are consequences always negative? No. Well, we call them blessings when they're not negative, right? So If you choose to do the right thing, you get blessings. If you choose to be a good husband, you get a loving wife.
You hope.
You hope. If you,
Are just not happy with themselves, so they may not be a loving, even though you're choosing to do right.
this is always true. If you choose to be a good employee, you get to stay employed. Choose to be a good boss or a good owner of a company, you have a great company, right? One that does well, that people want to be there. If you choose to be a good member of this congregation, you get the love and the respect that comes back from the other people in this congregation, and that gives you strength and buoys you. I feel so much better when I'm able to come here and spend time with y'all. It gives me energy to get through the week. It increases my spirits. In those weeks that I can't be here because of my work schedule, or even if we're just traveling, I don't feel as good. This is if I'm a battery, y'all are my chargers. God's my charger, but he does that through y'all. So what else? Anybody else got some personal antidotes for consequences and blessings and consequences? Yes, ma'am.
Plus, people that may have had a baby out of wedlock, but it's a blessing in that is, it was something that wasn't right, it was the baby, out of fornication or adultery, but the baby ended up being such a blessing. So God can use any.
I do think sometimes things are horrible when you're going through them and they feel like a curse. You mentioned marriage earlier. Everybody knows that I'm divorced and remarried. And that first wedding, first marriage, it was good at first. I'm not going to say it was always bad, but the last several years were bad, and not just for me, but for her too. It's not. I'm not going to ever say that I'm innocent. And I would question, why am I going through this? Well, I got through all that, and I'm a different person on the backside of that. I'm a different human being. I think differently. I act differently. And then God blessed me with another marriage to a wonderful woman, and the best blessing I've ever had in my life. And I'm thankful for it. So sometimes we go through difficult things to get out the other side, to learn and to become better people. Be a lot easier if we didn't have to go through those.
I think this is where God's covenant is different than other covenants in the time, because God shows everything is redeemable, right? Everything is redeemable, whether it be the year of Jubilee, right? Whether it be cities of refuge, if you have to, like, God says, here's the rules, and also here's how to be redeemed when things don't go as planned. So whether it be, our lives today where, something happens where you're like, maybe it's not exactly the way it was pictured to be or supposed to be, but everything is still redeemable by God. And I know we see it sometimes now in the New Testament for sure, but even here in the Old Testament, I think we see echoes of the redemption story that God puts in front of us.
I had a daughter that had a child out of wedlock, but before that happened, she was a kind of a rebellious child. She was a middle child, so she was kind of rebellious. I asked God, do whatever you do or can do to get her attention, to turn her life around. She had that child, and I believe that was God's answer to turn her around, because when she went into the mother's home, her life began to turn around again. The baby we put up for adoption, not by my choice, but she was put up for adoption. But I still have contact with the child. She's still my granddaughter, and she understands what went on at that time. So a blessing did come out of that situation, and I believe that that's God's working to say, this is the outcome, and this is how I got here.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And not all of us respond to the same stuff. And some of us need to really be, given a good shaking to respond. Anyone else? All right, let's move on to the next one here. We're down to 25 minutes and we got 2 questions and a closing to discuss. Let's Let's move on to the Song of Moses. How does how does Moses' song's blessing and death frame the handoff to Josiah? So in his song, he serves as a prophetic text warning that Israel will not obey the covenant, but will suffer terribly, yet will finally experience redemption by a mighty act of God. Moses' blessing to the tribes emphasizes the ideal of unity of the tribes as a single people, one group, and places their security and prosperity in the blessings of God. When y'all read through Moses' song, what did y'all think about that? Let me ask this question, because I've got this at the end of this particular statement. Who wrote Moses' song? Did Moses write his song? Why do we call it Moses' song? Who's the author of Moses' song? Anyone know? You have to bear with me. I did not know this thing would act this way without internet hookup, and I didn't hook it up. Deuteronomy 31, down about verse 19.
Jim, I think it's still, of course, everything's inspired through God, but it's Moses again going back and saying, remember, right? This whole journey that we've been on the last several weeks is both God and Moses reminding, don't forget. So I read it as that him reciting that journey that they've been on, and then concluding with saying, don't forget. And then when we get to the end about what's next, mankind did forget. They forgot again.
Yep,
immediately.
we're warned of that. Specifically, though, let's look.
30:19, he says now.
31:19. 31:19. Wait, were you going where I quoted earlier? If you got something else, I'm sorry if I cut you off.
God is talking to Moses. He says, now therefore write this song.
Yes.
And teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths that this song might be a witness for me against the people of Israel.
Yeah. So who really wrote?
Inspired from God.
I read that as God told Moses what to write.
Yep.
I read that as this is a song directly from God. If I'm wrong, I may be wrong, but the way I read that passage is God said, hey, here's a song, write this down. So that got me thinking, do we have any other songs that are directly written by God that we're aware of? Does anyone know? Because Google gave me kind of a wishy-washy answer. I didn't like the answer too much.
In some ways, I feel like when we sing scripture, we're singing a song written by God.
I think those are,
Given by God.
were they? Or were they written by, are they inspired by God?
Scripture is inspired by God.
All scripture is inspired by God. I'm not arguing that point. What I'm saying is that these particular song based on that passage is not inspired by God, but dictated by God. Love some fit. If you disagree, please push back. Are there any other songs in the Bible that we are aware of that are dictated by God, not inspired by God? Google tells me there's some in Revelations, and I don't know. It didn't bother to give me chapter and verse, and I don't claim to be a Revelation expert. I've sat through multiple classes of that and still am lost. It did mention Psalms, but those are not dictated by God. Those are inspired by God, as is the rest of the scripture. I don't know why this verse never stood out to me until this reading. I've read this more than once. I will admit my mind starts wandering some in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but I've never caught this chapter, this verse before. So that is another reason why it's a good thing to read and reread and reread, because you catch things that you missed the first 10 times on the 11th reading.
Well, I might be wrong too, but I don't think this is any different than what God did with the commandments with Moses, right?
No, it's not. It's not. God dictated the commandments too. You are 100% correct. Actually, he wrote it.
Yeah.
He actually wrote those on the stone tablet, at least the first set. Okay. I just thought it was interesting. What's everybody else? Anyone else have any comments or thoughts on the Song of Moses? Yes, ma'am.
I saw that right before it shows the song, it's like y'all need to learn it and recite it, right?
Yeah.
That makes me think, maybe we should still be doing that.
I am terrible at memorizing verses. I usually know it's in there somewhere. I'm a good summary, good big picture guy. I'm not a detail person. I grew up Episcopalian, so I know the Lord's Prayer by memory because boy, that was beat into you. But that may be all I know verbatim. Anybody else? Okay. How about Psalm 90? What you guys think about that? I like Psalms. I like it's easier for me to read the portions of the Bible that come across as a story. I don't know if that's my Western brain versus an Eastern brain, or if it's particularly the books of the law read like what they are, legalese, and I struggle with reading that. What about Psalm 90?
I think of Moses still pleading on behalf of the Israelites through God, which is what he's done in his entire journey is pleading on their behalf.
Yeah. Moses has always kind of been a buffer between God's wrath and the people, right? And once he passes, that kind of goes away to some case, right? I mean, by the end of Joshua's life, it was already kind of obvious that there were some major problems happening. And definitely as you get a couple hundred years down the road, there's some issues. Y'all are quiet this morning. I don't know if I can teach with a quiet class. This is driving me nuts. I need Jim Herman here. He'd bail me out.
You can see Moses' problem. I would use the word mediator rather than buffer. He was the mediator between the two groups of people. But you have to understand something about Moses. How many people was he leading?
So-
2, 3, 4, 1,500,000, 600,000 people? Okay, suppose you today say, I am responsible for 600,000 people. Good luck.
Fighting.
Yeah.
That's the fire.
Yeah.
We're talking about 1.6 million people, and you got one person? Good luck. What I'm saying is, I can convince you, if I try hard enough, one-on-one to agree with me, okay? If I try hard enough. But if I got 1 million people, forget it. You know what I'm saying? And you got, I can convince somebody in this room, but they can, all these people can convince me. I can convince 2 or 3. What I'm saying is that the amount of work that he had to do, you can understand why he said they're faithless people. They're stupid. They're dumb. They're ugly. They're whatever. Pick up the word, because he knew their hearts, and he was still willing to say, "Okay, I will be the mediator between you and God."
I think Moses is an archetype of Jesus.
Yeah.
As a mediator between us and God. And, if you'll notice when he appoints Joshua, that Joshua takes over from Moses at the end of the book. God warns, Joshua, he says, go back and read and reread everything so that you don't mess up. Go back and read and continue studying all your life. And I think that's an indication of what we need to do. But we're mortal, and I don't know about y'all, but I forgot what I had to write. You have to go back and be in the Word, even in the books of Deuteronomy, Numbers, all these books that we just kind of slog through. Time wanders a little bit. We have, if you living in that time, we had to know every one of those things. And if you're gonna live in the country, you gotta know this stuff. Anyway, I think it's good that we spend our time in these more difficult and obscure books and derive their meanings from them. I think it's very helpful. Very good.
I think these books give us a foundation of our faith, right? They build the foundation, and you got to have a good solid foundation.
Our children understand, if we teach it to them, it helps them understand why.
Yes. Yeah.
And how God feels about things. Surprisingly, things we think are small make him very angry. You know, thus, the greater the grace of Jesus. But anyway, it's interesting.
Well, and we're told later on that God doesn't differentiate between sins, right? They're all the same. We differentiate between sins. You mentioned adultery earlier. It's one of the big ones. Homosexuality, one of the big ones that we, for some reason, and I don't know if is it just our society or is it all mankind that puts sins of the flesh, I guess, let's use that term, at a higher level than other sins. But they're not. All sins are really the same. They're still sins. You still can be forgiven for them. But you got to ask. It's not just given without your asking, not given without your repentance. All right. Well, y'all have actually gotten to the end of my notes. I don't think I've ever gotten to the end of notes. Wow.
I think also part of it, because Deuteronomy is a repeating. And in, I think it was chapter 6, he said, sit down and tell your children, remind them over and over. They didn't have TV, okay? They sat down and reminded their children of this covenant. They reminded their children of God's miracles of bringing them through the Red Sea. And that these people who were in Deuteronomy were less than 20 years old when all that happened. Because it was those 20 years and older who died in the wilderness. So they were almost children. So they had wandered in the wilderness 40 years. So now they're in their 60s. Okay. So they can tell their children, this is what happened. This is why God did this. This is the covenant, and it had to be repeated. Just like we repeat our Bible classes, saying, going back over the birth of Jesus, going back over the 10 Commandments. We have to repeat because it builds that foundation and it helps them to understand who God is and why he loves us so much.
Yeah. So and I didn't write it down the verse, so I'm not gonna be able to put my finger on it. But one of the things in here that as God is talking to Moses at the very end there, he tells them that the Israelites are going to go into the land and that they are going to eventually fall away from him. And that for their redemption, it's going to take a great act by God. There's multiple times that passage can be applied to, right? The Israelites are pulled out and dispersed and brought back in. And that can be applied to a couple of different times. But of course, looking at it through the lens of the New Testament, all I see is Jesus in that particular verse. So, and then I think, okay, we symbolize God as a father figure because that's how we can relate to it, right? As a parent, as a parental figure, and we are the children of Him. And I think, boy, if I have given my kids everything, and I know when I give it to them that they're gonna not only reject it, they're gonna turn their back on me and curse me for it. Boy, that would be difficult to actually do. I think as a parent, I get it. I mean, I love my children and they're always welcome no matter how bad it gets in my house, and they're always welcome back. But I think, well, you know, you've done all this stuff for them. You've given them everything they could ever hope for. You've put some really reasonable policies in place, rules in place that are designed to help them, to be good for them. and then they reject all of that and turn their back on you, and you say, I'm going to do this great thing to bring you back in. Um, that's a lot of love. I think as a parent, we probably all come pretty close to that. But I've seen plenty of people who have struggled enough with children, or children that have gone so far off the plan of the parent that they have to put a distance. Not that they don't love them, but they have to put a distance between them and say, you just can't be around me anymore because of the problems. So that does happen. But just thinking, I read through that, and all through the whole Bible, I read through that, and I just am amazed at how much love God has for us. We're just, in the scheme of things, he's this eternal, all powerful, all knowing being, and really we're like ants, or maybe even less than that. We're nothing, right? But we're his children, and he loves us, and he wants us to be with him. And he's given us this world, and he's given us some basic rules on how to live within it. And he's given us a way that if we do make a mistake, to come back to him, right? Through Jesus Christ and his forgiveness. And it breaks my heart to see how many people are unwilling to take advantage of that grace. How many people have turned their back on God, knowingly turned their back on God, people that know him, have been taught about him, and have decided that whatever it is that they're doing in this world is more important to them than their Father's love. So we're early today. I'd be glad to sit in here and talk with y'all for some more, but I don't have anything else on the subject matter that we read. What else? We got 10 minutes. Anybody got anything they want to bring up for 10 minutes?
I just want to say that Moses' father-in-law had a whole lot to do with coming in there and giving a recommendation to him. He says, you're being overburdened. You need to divide up the responsibility, and that's what he did. They got men that were very knowledgeable, and they gave them authority over 1,000, over 100, over 50, over 10, and it took the burden off of Moses. Moses went to God prior to that, and he said, how can I control these people? They're just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think his father-in-law gets a lot of credit for because he's just such shortly mentioned. But the little bit we know about him, he sounds like he's a pretty great man in his own right. All right. So I don't think he'd come to that answer either for Moses if he already wasn't leading a lot of people himself and had already had that experience of, as was mentioned earlier, trying to lead. He probably wasn't leading 1 million people, but trying to lead a lot of people. I don't know how many of you people, or how many of y'all have been in a position of leadership over a group of people. The most I ever had at one time was 150. And a lot of times it felt like herding cats. So, and at 100, I didn't have the option of having sub-lieutenants. I was it. I was the lowest level of management in that yard. And so all 150 were my responsibility. It is daunting. I have less people I'm responsible for today, but more money. That's an interesting endeavor. So a lot less people, about like 20, but 10 times as much money. All right.
Better than the other way around.
Yeah, 150 was enough. The older I get, the happier I am that I did not pursue going further and further up in the corporation. I got to a level and was like, I'm good. Leave me alone.
I think as we close out our time with Moses, it's just good to remind ourselves of, this was the man who was found in a basket of reeds, who was raised in Egypt, the superpower of the time, who killed a man, who God redeemed and said, I'm going to use you to lead my people, right? And this is the tail end of his story. And I think Tim brought it up a couple weeks ago. In Scripture says there's never yet been another prophet like Moses, right? That God spoke directly to face. And at Israel's request, right? It says in here that Israel said, don't let him speak to us or we will surely die. So God said, fine, I will honor your request. I will speak to Moses. And since that time, we've not had anybody since. And we've seen his life now from beginning to end, like we talked about, just the numerous people that he's had to lead. And yet, when we think about how it applies to us today, I think one of the key things that I see here is that God calls people to not sit idly by, right? So whether it's his father-in-law saying, hey, you need to divvy out the responsibility, it's too much for you to carry alone. I think it's the same holds true for us today in our church body, right? Like, we are not called to be passive. We're not called to sit. We are called to be there for one another. We're called to serve and to give and to be a part of the body and not just sit idly by, right? At minimum, it's what Deuteronomy 6 says, teach them to your children when they wake up, when they go to bed, one day in the future, they will ask, why is it that we did this? And we're called to recall that. And so I think as we think about, the end of Moses' life, I think that's one of the big takeaway lessons, at least for me, is we're not called to be passive. We're not called to just sit idly by. We're called to contribute, and we're called to, to bind it to our hearts, bind it to our, foreheads, and make sure that we're passing it along.
Let's also don't forget that Moses didn't want the job. Moses didn't think he was capable of doing the job. So, and again, I know I use a lot of personal anecdotes, but I don't particularly think I'm good at this job. I've been told I am by some of y'all, and I really appreciate that. You have no idea how much that means to me. I don't think I'm really a good teacher. I can't quote scripture and verse to you. That's not one of my gifts. I don't think I'm really well organized. I don't present things. I don't have the fancy stuff on the board like some people do. So like Moses, I'm a little resistant for this job. Also, like Moses, I think in the end, I'm thankful for the opportunity. So I do appreciate it. Thank y'all so much. Love all of y'all. Let's have a good day.